One normal season supporting Chelsea. That's all I ask for. Hello there, guys. What is going on? SonOfChelsea back here again. It's been a shocking day. It really has. Just published my piece for Football London. It's a long read, almost 2,000 words, on Thomas Tuchel, on his legacy, on his Chelsea story, which ended today, obviously. Please go and read it. I'll leave a link in the description box below because I don't think I can get to everything, and the many different parts of that I sort of delve into, from it going wrong obviously in the first few games of this season, last night's game, but then looking at all the positives, and that's kind of what I mainly want to do in this video. We'll get to Graham Potter and the talks there, because as it was, when Tuchel replaced Lampard, it all happened very quickly, and it was hard not to get whiplash. And I find it interesting kind of looking at some of the responses to today and people who are really upset by this news. And it kind of does transport me back to Jan of 2021, when personally, as people may have known at the time if you were watching this channel and read some of my pieces after, Lampard personally, sentimentally for me, of course, in terms of coaches and what they did at Chelsea, it's incomparable. But that was one that hit me hard. So I completely understand where people are coming from. And as the day's gone on, as kind of, because my brain is a little bit fried and I've taken a lot of information and obviously doing a lot of work today, slowing down. And for my piece, I found that clip of him, Thomas Tuchel, the Lille away game, where the away fans were held back and they were singing, "We've got Thomas Tuchel," over and over again. "We've got Super Thomas Tuchel. He knows exactly what we need." And he turns around and he's pumping his fist towards the away support. And obviously that was during that March period when the sanctions had just hit, and he was being such a statesman and a spokesperson, really the only public one from the club at the time. And that's a small moment. I think a lot of people will rightly look back at the Champions League victory. But it was just a small moment that reminded me of, what could have been, but what clearly was there, and I think is still going to be there, with Thomas Tuchel and the connection he made to Chelsea supporters. And that is the thing. I think as much as people will be disappointed about what could have been, it sounds kind of cliche and cringy, but that the history he made at Chelsea in a short space of time, mainly the Champions League, but the other things he did, I think he leaves Chelsea with his reputation in such high esteem, despite the criticisms, a lot of people have a go at me, criticisms I've had of Tuchel over the past few weeks. I don't think they've been hyperbolic. I don't think they've been unfair, because I think the performances haven't been good. But as you also know on this channel, I'm not someone who calls for managers' heads, and I was completely shocked by the news this morning. I really was. But we'll get to whether we were always going to get to this point in the end with Thomas Tuchel, based on what was happening at the start of the season. Is it harsh? I think it is, and you have to question the strategy of the new owners, because you hand the keys to Thomas Tuchel over a transfer window. You buy many players that he wants. In one particular case that I can think of with Jules Koundé, you kind of veer away from that player because the coach apparently doesn't want him. You sell off Billy Gilmour for a really low fee on deadline day, and you buy Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, who's only had one game, not even one full game for Chelsea. Those two ones there are kind of the two that feel the most bizarre when you're making this call. I think the rest of the players, I have confidence will work under a lot of coaches. I really do. I think we haven't bought many specialist players. I may be proven wrong, but I think that the players we have bought this summer, helped by Tuchel, because he is a coach who is flexible, and I think you do need players like that. So I don't think it's going to be as bad as previous regimes in terms of buying very specialist players who work in one style of football. I think we've got adaptable enough players who I think will fit, mainly as well with the type of coaches we're going for. But you've got to ask questions about that. Tuchel is one of the most highly regarded coaches in European football, and he has proved that at Chelsea. He proved that in his first 4 months, and to let that walk out the door is a massive risk. There is no denying that. That doesn't mean that Tuchel as a coach, his sort of downfall at Chelsea, he bears no responsibility in it, and there was nothing to critique, and things were just absolutely perfect, and they always have been. Obviously that's not the case, as we'll get into with some of the numbers and my feelings on how this has unfolded. But at the same point, it's an absolutely massive risk, because he has proven in some big games how good he is at setting up a Chelsea team that at times hasn't always been perfect. He's had to put players in positions that they're not accustomed to. I think the Real Madrid game is probably the best example of that, and the way he regalvanized, everyone at Chelsea when he arrived was inspirational. It really was. I'll put it on screen now, some of the stats, in terms of, despite being in charge for Chelsea for just 589 days, no manager has ever reached more major domestic European finals with the Blues than Thomas Tuchel, and that's 4. And his legacy at Chelsea, I think, has to be positive in the main. Not only in terms of what he achieved on the pitch, but how he connected with people off it. And that has to mean something. I know we live in a game, particularly on social media, where people reject the idea of sentiment, and they reject the idea of, things that are kind of smaller in the game, rather than just winning trophies and standards that I sort of joke about a lot of the time. It does matter that you care about and you connect with not only your coach but the players on the pitch, and that's what Tuchel brought from his first press conference. I think the first press conference, you still need to go back and watch it, arguably was Tuchel's best moment at Chelsea. Kind of sounds sad that it was his first kind of appearance there, but I just think the way he handled himself in what was such a challenging week for Chelsea fans, where people were divided, there was uncertainty, there was a bit of whiplash, and he just made people buy into his ideas. And many times during his tenure, he was able to speak directly to Chelsea fans, and particularly the way he broke down the game. And it was a shame sometimes that some of his best answers would come in like the embargoed sections of press conferences when cameras were turned off, and he'd really go in depth on tactics, and you'd see his eyes light up when people would ask him questions about that stuff. It's a shame sometimes in kind of the main broadcast section of press conferences we don't get that. We usually get not maybe as in-depth questions, but there's no denying that people enjoyed listening to him speak. And when he got his team flowing as he did for a period of time, they did achieve extraordinary things. The Champions League, you can never take that away from Thomas Tuchel, and we were the best team in Europe. It was a different type of win to the one we had in Munich. In Porto, Chelsea proved they were the best team in Europe that season. The defensive quality, the way he improved players like Andreas Christensen and Antonio Rudiger, Jorginho, players like that too, who had been doubted at Chelsea before he arrived. Players that I think a lot of people felt could never reach those levels. But even if it was for a short period, he enabled that. Some of the big hoodoos, winning a Champions League knockout tie, which obviously led to winning the competition, winning at the Etihad, winning at Anfield. For a period, I think that a lot of us felt that Tuchel was the guy. He was the one that was going to break the mould. And the way he spoke, the way he was kind of self-deprecating, and he joked about being sacked a lot, it kind of felt like that kind of fresh honesty was there with Tuchel. And I think that's what really connected with people on such a regular basis, that the humility, the honesty, but the fact this was an elite tactician as well. But there was nothing kind of sterile and distant from Tuchel. I also think you've got to give him credit for the way he handled himself during the European Super League and the sanctions and things that other Chelsea coaches did not have to deal with, and he dealt with them so well and only further strengthened his reputation as a coach. But I think we'd be dishonest if we didn't raise the concerns we've been having, and I think expected Chelsea, who does a lot of good work in terms of breaking down the numbers and analysis of Chelsea, did a long thread today about the pros and cons and why he personally feels this is the right time to cut ties with Thomas Tuchel, which obviously I know is going to be a controversial opinion. But he just brings up here, as you can see, the form over the last 9 months, looking at Chelsea's chance creation and defensive quality and how it's deteriorated. Now, there are many factors for that, as there was under Frank Lampard, as there was, under Maurizio Sarri. There are many things for me with Tuchel that I don't think are directly his fault. I think he is... The thing that made Tuchel so extraordinary, I think, in the first 6 to 8 months of his reign, was it felt like he was going above all the problems that we'd seen before. And it felt like his coaching quality was surpassing maybe the identity crisis we had before he arrived, or the problem in squad and sort of the profile of the squad. He was just able to surpass that. But I think the longer his time at Chelsea has gone on, the less his impact has sort of reared its head. I mean, I think that the sad thing is, since that Juventus win, I don't think there are many Chelsea games I've enjoyed watching. There are many Chelsea performances that have been really emphatic, that have reached that level again. Real Madrid is the only one. And that is Tuchel's great strength. You know, he is the ultimate, I think, one-off cup coach. And I don't think that's an insult. Listen, winning cups, winning trophies is wonderful. And competing in the Champions League is so impressive the way he did. But for a coach, I think, that needed to prove that he could do more in the Premier League, and people will say he did not get enough time, which I think is a valid counterpoint. There were too many times last season where I did think, just critically in games, our sort of pattern of play, our approach. Sometimes, yes, we can look at the balance in midfield. It is ironic that in some ways a theme of some of his last games was a problem in midfield, which was something that, as I'll go back to, I think Lampard struggled with as well. That still hasn't been rectified. That is an overarching problem that isn't just down to one single coach. But there is also a factor where he has made decisions throughout his time here that I think you can criticise or ask questions of. I think the exclusion of Tammy Abraham early on is still baffling to me. And considering he still has a goal scoring problem, or did until he was sacked, it made no sense to me. And it still doesn't make much sense to me. Because we didn't rectify it. He brings in Romelu Lukaku, who he signed off on. You know, there was so much talk about him liking the previous regime, and that's kind of where the friction has begun with Bowley and Clearlake this summer, and them wanting to have more input from him on a transfer perspective. But, you know, the Lukaku situation, we've been through it a lot over the summer, and where it went wrong, where do you apportion blame? But again, you let one player go, a young player who consistently scored goals. You know, at the top level, you do live and die by those decisions. And weirdly, again, it felt like halfway through the season when Lukaku did that interview and Tuchel gained more respect from that. Again, it was kind of a signal that maybe this is going to go in a different direction. But you add a lot of players underperforming under him, the attack just never really clicking on a consistent basis. I don't think it's unfair to turn around and ask questions at least and say things should have been better at points. But we will never get to see whether Tuchel would have changed that. But reading some of the pieces I have from the likes of Matt Law, you know, Adam Newson, it tracks back to the summer where I was in Orlando. I've said this before, and I was very concerned by what I saw against Arsenal. And that type of performance, the mood, the energy of that display where things felt very disconnected and the players just weren't really gelling, a lot of that has translated into the season itself. Whatever Tuchel is trying to put on the pitch, those players aren't there. And I will say this, that I do wonder whether, based on what we've been hearing, those frictions, those tensions, a new ownership wanting to go in a different direction, that alignment I think is so important, and them as well investing so much in young players, and Tuchel's approach to some of the young players in the squad. I just wonder whether we would have reached this point inevitably. Maybe not until next summer, but there may have just been that separation, because at the end of the day, and Ollie Glanville, I've got to give credit for saying this, I think he was the perfect Abramovich manager. I really do. And it was, you know, it's ironic that he was the final Abramovich manager. I think he just fit into that culture so much better, because at his core, I think he is a win now manager as a coach. And I don't think he was the guy that was going to stick around for years and years and years, because if you looked at his previous, you know, CV, if you just looked at the type of way he approached certain decisions, I think he always tried to value the here and now, which I don't, you know, at a club like Chelsea, you can't really argue against that, because that's been the dominant culture. But quite clearly for the new ownership, they didn't see eye to eye with that. And listen, the new ownership has to get the next appointment right, and it's a bold thing, because Tuchel could go somewhere else and win another Champions League. But the connection he will have to Chelsea supporters will always be there. That will never go away. And today I'm more reflecting on the highs with him, because you kind of have to, right? I think you have to reflect on what he did as Chelsea's head coach and the positives. And I'm quite glad actually that it didn't get that toxic. You know, we never got into the Lampard or Mourinho or even Conte levels of misery. You know, it kind of just ended a bit like the Jose first tenure. It just ends, and maybe that's better, because I could not be asked for another culture war online. I could not be asked for, you know, all of that toxicity, which probably still rears its head anyway today, with people obviously annoyed with the decision and other people disagreeing with them. That's social media every single day. But he leaves with his stock, I think, still pretty high, and rightly so for what he's done at Chelsea. But I do think there are criticisms when you look at trends, when you look at the style of play, when you look at situations where maybe personnel-wise he could have made different decisions that could have gone a different way. But for me now, you've got to look towards the future, and this is Chelsea, and I know some people will be hurting, and some people will find it difficult in the first few weeks to get on board with the next coach. I think that's understandable. It really is. Tuchel has given a lot, and he's connected to people very personally, and I think that's something that you need to cherish as a fan, because those are, I think, for a lot of people, especially those who go to football matches, those are those moments that you want those moments to live away. I think about Newcastle at home, even smaller moments with Tuchel that have meant a lot, and obviously the Champions League final is the high point, and I think a lot of us will be going back and rewatching that again if we don't do it on a monthly basis anyway. So I'm grateful to Thomas Tuchel. I think he, for someone who was reading a lot about German football and respect for that level of coaching, to see someone of that level come into Chelsea and have the impact and win a European Cup was very, very special. And generally, the hope is it could have been more, but it was 100 days, and in that 100 days, Tuchel did a lot of good things for Chelsea. So now we move on, and it looks like the moving on is going to be Graham Potter. Quite a shock. I find it a little bit curious and just a little bit funny, actually, that people who've been very complimentary of Graham Potter are now kind of changing their tune because he might become Chelsea's new head coach. I'll put a tweet up now from Adam Newson, who has been reporting today about Chelsea having meetings, Brighton giving permission for Chelsea to speak to Graham Potter. Out of the two options that have been touted, Pochettino and Graham Potter, I think they make sense based on at least what the intention seems to be with Chelsea. I think you need someone along who can work with a director of football, which was a concern of Tuchel. And I was going to do a Q&A which had so many Tuchel questions, which reminds me a bit of the Lampard thing. I was going to do a Q&A, and a lot of those questions kind of have to be thrown in the bin, unfortunately, because a lot of them related to Tuchel. But you need someone who's going to work with a director of football and deal with that situation and environment, which quite clearly the Chelsea hierarchy want to do. And obviously Potter has worked in that system. And just reading about Potter, I think he's a really interesting character. I will be doing more videos specifically on him, but I think I'm excited by that appointment. I think there could be some interesting things at Chelsea in the coming years. Listen, I think that them sacking him today is going to make any new appointment. Yeah, there's going to be a lot of people shrugging their shoulders and rolling eyes, being like, yeah, whatever. He'll be here for like 6 months and then he'll be gone as well. Listen, we don't know that. That may be the case. That may not be the case. Chelsea's still going to be here tomorrow. I'm still going to be making videos about Chelsea. And we just hope and we wish that, whatever the future holds, it's successful for Chelsea. But for Tuchel, I'm extremely grateful. As I say, please go and read that piece because it sort of delves into my feelings probably a lot better, because I wrote it a little bit earlier and my brain isn't as fried. And I'm probably going to be speaking a lot more about Tuchel on different podcasts and stuff. So thank you guys for watching. Hope you're doing well. Hope you've had a good day. Listen, I mean, if you're feeling down, just go back and watch some of the good performances under Thomas Tuchel. The Champions League run will probably make you happy. If not, a little bit emotional. All the best, Thomas Tuchel. He will always be, I think, as I say, because it didn't end really sour, it was only a few defeats. I think he'll be looked back on as a successful Chelsea manager, and arguably to some people one of the greatest, if not the greatest, or if not your personal favourite. Let me know if he was your personal favourite in the comments below. Follow me on Twitter @SonOfChelsea, and I'll see you again very soon. All the best.